The morning sun cast long shadows across Kandahar airfield as Major Artemis Ghost Valdez spread the tactical maps across the metal briefing table. Her calloused fingers traced potential flight paths while steam rose from her third cup of coffee. At 34, she'd logged more combat hours than most pilots would see in 2 careers, but the base still buzzed with whispers about the female pilot who thinks she's Maverick. They didn't know that Ghost had earned her call sign not from stealth, but from how quietly she'd made 17 confirmed kills disappear from Taliban radar screens over the past 18 months. The ops tent flap snapped open, letting in a rush of desert heat and the distant whine of F-16 engines spooling up. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Bulldog Richardson stepped inside, his weathered face grave beneath the brim of his patrol cap. Behind him trailed Captain Jake Phantom Morrison, the squadron's golden boy whose perfect teeth and recruitment poster jawline had made him the unofficial face of their unit's publicity photos. "Ghost, we've got a situation." Bulldog's voice carried the weight of bad news. He activated the secure tablet, and the screen flickered to life with drone footage from somewhere deep in the Korangal Valley. The image showed a compound nestled against jagged mountain slopes, but it was the coordinates in the corner that made Ghost's blood freeze. Those were her exact coordinates from 3 days ago. "Sir, that's impossible," she said, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her chest. "That mission was classified. Only 4 people knew those waypoints." She looked between the two men, reading their faces like instrument panels in a storm. Bulldog's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Phantom avoided her eyes entirely. The drone feed switched to thermal imaging, revealing heat signatures moving through the compound with military precision. 2 organized for local insurgents. 2 well-equipped for random militants. The timestamp showed the footage was less than 6 hours old, which meant someone had been watching, waiting, using her own reconnaissance data against coalition forces. "There's more," Bulldog said, his finger hovering over the tablet. 3 hours ago, we lost contact with Recon Team 7. Their last known position was 15 clicks from your surveillance point. The screen filled with static, then cleared to show smoke rising from what had been an American outpost. 12 Marines, Ghost, all because someone knew exactly where to look. The tent fell silent except for the distant rumble of aircraft and the harsh whisper of wind through the base perimeter. Ghost stared at the coordinates that had become a death sentence for 12 good soldiers. Someone had turned her mission into a trap, and now American blood was on Afghan soil because of intelligence that should have been locked in the deepest vaults of military security. The hunt was about to begin, but Ghost couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't the hunter, she was the prey. Captain Morrison finally looked up, his blue eyes cold as winter sky. "The brass wants answers, Major, and they want them from you." His tone carried an accusation that hung in the superheated air like a blade waiting to fall. Outside, another F-16 screamed past, but Ghost barely heard it over the pounding of her own heart. Someone had betrayed them all. Someone with access to her flight data, her mission parameters, her personal call signs. Someone who knew exactly how Ghost operated, how she thought, how she flew. The realization hit her like flak bursting in a clear sky. This wasn't just intelligence failure. This was personal. Bulldog's weathered hands trembled slightly as he closed the tablet. 27 years of military service had taught him to read between the lines of classified briefings and Pentagon doublespeak. "Pack your gear, Ghost. You're going wheels up in 30 minutes. He paused, meeting her eyes with something that looked like an apology. "And Valdez, this time you're not flying alone." The implication struck home immediately. They didn't trust her anymore. After 18 months of flawless operations, after 17 confirmed kills, after bleeding for the flag she'd sworn to defend, they thought she might be the leak. Ghost felt the familiar burn of injustice, the same fire that had driven her through flight school when instructors said women couldn't handle the G-forces of combat aviation. Phantom stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. "I'll be your wingman for this one, Ghost. Orders from the top. The smile that followed was razor-thin and completely without warmth, just to make sure everything goes according to protocol. Ghost nodded curtly, her face a mask of professional composure. Inside, her mind raced through possibilities like a targeting computer acquiring threats, who had access to her mission data, who knew her flight patterns well enough to predict her reconnaissance routes. The list was terrifyingly short, and everyone on it wore the same uniform she did. She gathered her maps with steady hands, each fold a small act of defiance against the suspicion poisoning the air around her. Whatever trap was waiting in the Korengal Valley, whatever enemy had turned her own intelligence against American forces, she would face it head-on. Because that's what Ghost did. She flew into the darkness and emerged victorious. But first, she had to survive the enemy sitting right beside her. The walk to the flight line felt like a death march. Ghost's boots crunched on gravel and sand as she carried her helmet and survival gear toward the waiting F-16. The morning sun had climbed higher, turning the metal surfaces of aircraft into burning mirrors that threw heat waves across the tarmac. Maintenance crews worked with practiced efficiency, but their usual banter died when she passed. Word traveled fast on military bases, and the Whisper network had already painted her as either incompetent or treacherous. Neither option sat well with a woman who had dedicated her life to serving her country. Her F-16C Fighting Falcon waited in the designated spot, its gray paint scheme dulled by months of desert operations. The crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, gave her a thumbs-up as she approached, but even he seemed subdued. "She's fueled and ready, Major. Weapons load is standard air-to-ground package per your orders." His voice carried professional courtesy, but his eyes held questions he couldn't ask. Ghost ran her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision, checking every surface, every connection, every system that would keep her alive once she left the relative safety of the airfield. The familiar ritual calmed her racing thoughts and reminded her why she'd fallen in love with flying in the first place. Up there, surrounded by nothing but sky and speed, politics couldn't touch her. Rank meant nothing to physics, and gender was irrelevant to gravity. Phantom appeared at her wing, his own F-16 gleaming under the harsh sun. He'd always been meticulous about his aircraft's appearance, using every opportunity to showcase his perfectionism. Today felt different, though. His pre-flight seemed rushed, almost perfunctory, as if he were going through motions rather than preparing for combat operations. "Ready when you are, Ghost," he called across the flight line, but his voice carried an undertone she couldn't identify. Anticipation, nervousness, something darker. The tower crackled to life in her headset as she settled into the cockpit. "Ghost 11, Kandahar Tower. You're cleared for takeoff on runway 09. Wind is 270 at 15 knots. Good hunting out there." Good hunting. The phrase that used to fill her with professional pride now felt ominous. Who exactly was the prey in this mission? The Taliban forces allegedly operating in the Korengal Valley, or the pilot they suspected of feeding intelligence to the enemy? Ghost advanced the throttle, feeling 30,000 pounds of thrust push her back into her ejection seat. The runway blurred past as her F-16 accelerated toward takeoff speed, and for a moment, the familiar thrill of flight washed away her fears. This was where she belonged, not in briefing rooms full of suspicious stares, but here in the cockpit where skill mattered more than speculation. Phantom's voice crackled through the radio as they climbed toward their cruising altitude. "Ghost, this is Phantom. Let's keep it professional up here." The warning was subtle but unmistakable. He was watching her every move, ready to report any deviation from standard protocol. Or perhaps ready for something worse. The Hindu Kush mountains rose ahead like jagged teeth against the morning sky. Somewhere in those peaks waited answers that could clear her name or destroy her career. Ghost checked her instruments one final time, then settled in for the flight that would determine her fate. Behind her, Kandahar Airfield shrank to a brown smudge on the desert floor. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the growing suspicion that this mission was designed to be her last. The Korangal Valley spread below them like a moonscape carved by ancient violence. Ghost's F-16 cast a shadow across ridgelines that had witnessed centuries of warfare, from Alexander's legions to Soviet helicopters to American forces locked in an endless struggle against an invisible enemy. Through her canopy, the mountains looked deceptively peaceful, brown and gray stone weathered smooth by wind and time, with patches of green where water had found its way down from glacial peaks. Ghost 11, this is AWACS. We show you approaching target coordinates. Be advised, we're tracking multiple heat signatures in the valley below. The voice of the airborne controller was professional and calm, but Ghost caught the subtle tension beneath the words. Everyone knew this mission carried more weight than a standard reconnaissance flight. She banked left to begin her approach, checking her sensors and weapon systems. The targeting pod came online with a soft hum, its high-resolution cameras beginning to sweep the terrain below. What she saw through the digital feed made her breath catch in her throat. The compound was larger than the drone footage had suggested, with multiple buildings arranged in a defensive pattern that spoke of military experience rather than guerrilla improvisation. Vehicles moved between structures with purpose and discipline. This wasn't a random Taliban training camp. It was a full-scale military installation, hidden in one of the most remote valleys in Afghanistan. "Phantom, are you seeing this?" she transmitted on their secure channel. "Roger that, Ghost. Looks like we've found something bigger than expected." His response was measured, but she detected something else in his voice. Relief, satisfaction. The radio made it impossible to read his facial expressions, and she found herself wishing she could see his eyes. Ghost adjusted her flight path to maintain surveillance distance while gathering intelligence. The targeting pod's cameras captured detailed imagery of the facility, recording vehicle types, building layouts, and personnel movements. Standard operating procedure called for her to transmit this data back to Kandahar immediately, but something held her back. The coordinates still bothered her. The mathematical precision of the intelligence leak suggested inside knowledge that went beyond casual observation. Someone had known not just her general mission parameters, but her exact waypoints, her preferred surveillance positions, even her standard approach vectors. The level of detail required months of studying her flight patterns and operational preferences. "Ghost, this is Phantom. I'm picking up radio chatter on Taliban frequencies. They know we're here." The warning came through clearly, but again she detected that strange undertone in his voice. "We should probably head back and let the intel weenies figure out our next move." She was about to respond when her radar warning receiver suddenly screamed to life. Multiple surface-to-air missile sites had just illuminated her aircraft with targeting radar. The valley that had seemed empty moments before was revealed as a carefully prepared trap, bristling with Russian-made SAM systems that could reach out and touch her F-16 even at her current altitude. "Phantom, I'm spiked. Multiple SAM sites painting me." Ghost threw her aircraft into evasive maneuvers, diving toward the deck while dispensing chaff and flares. The mountains rushed up to meet her as she pushed the F-16 to its structural limits, pulling G-forces that grayed the edges of her vision. But Phantom's response chilled her more than any missile warning. "Copy that, Ghost. Good luck." No evasive action. No supporting maneuvers. No attempt to suppress the SAM sites or provide electronic countermeasures. Just those 3 words delivered with cold professionalism, as if he were watching a training exercise rather than a combat situation where his wingman was fighting for survival. Ghost realized with crystal clarity that she was completely alone. The first SA-11 missile lanced up from the valley floor like a white-hot spear, its vapor trail scrubbing a deadly arc across the morning sky. Ghost's electronic warfare system screamed warnings as the radar-guided weapon adjusted its trajectory to match her evasive maneuvers. She yanked the stick hard right, feeling the G-forces slam her against the side of her ejection seat as she dove between two ridgelines barely wide enough for her wingspan. "Phantom, where the hell are you?" she called over the radio, but received only static in response. Her radar screen showed his F-16 climbing away from the valley, gaining altitude and distance with every passing second. Whatever this mission was supposed to accomplish, her wingman had just abandoned her to face it alone. The missile lost lock as she flew through the radar shadow of a granite peak, but Ghost knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The valley floor was crawling with SAM sights, and more launches would follow. She needed to get out of the engagement envelope, but every escape route led through overlapping fields of fire from multiple missile batteries. Her mind raced through tactical options while her hands flew across the cockpit controls. The targeting pod was still recording, capturing detailed intelligence about the SAM positions and their deployment patterns. Someone had spent considerable time and resources setting up this elaborate ambush, positioning weapon systems to create an inescapable killing field in what should have been empty mountain terrain. They hadn't just known her coordinates, they'd known she would come looking. Another missile warning tone filled her headset as a second SAM site acquired lock. This time it was an older SA-3, slower, but with a larger warhead that could kill her even with a near miss. Ghost rolled inverted and pulled hard, diving toward a narrow canyon that offered the only available cover. The rocky walls flashed past her wingtips as she threaded the needle at over 400 knots, her aircraft's shadow dancing across stone surfaces carved by millennia of wind and water. The SA-3 impacted the canyon wall behind her in a brilliant orange fireball, showering her aircraft with debris that pinged off her canopy like deadly hail. She was still alive, but trapped in a valley surrounded by enemies who knew exactly how she would react to every threat they presented. That's when she realized the horrible truth. This wasn't just an ambush, it was an execution. Someone had studied her flight patterns, her tactical preferences, her instinctive responses to threats. They'd positioned missiles to funnel her into increasingly narrow escape routes, each one leading deeper into their carefully planned kill zone. And Phantom had led her here, knowing exactly what would happen. Ghost keyed her radio to the emergency frequency, broadcasting in the clear for anyone who might be listening. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Ghost 11. I am under attack in the Korangal Valley. Multiple SAM sites, heavy resistance. My wingman has departed the area." She paused, the weight of her next words settling like lead in her stomach. "I believe this is a setup. Repeat, I believe American forces have been compromised." The acknowledgement came not from Kandahar Tower or AWACS, but from an unexpected source. "Ghost 11, this is Reaper 27. We copy your mayday and are inbound to your position." The voice belonged to an A-10 pilot, his aircraft's distinctive twin engines already audible over the sound of her own motor. Someone was coming to help her. The question was whether they would arrive before the mountains claimed another American pilot, or before whoever had orchestrated this betrayal finished the job they'd started with 12 dead Marines and a carefully prepared killing field. The A-10 Thunderbolt appeared like salvation, wrapped in gray paint and titanium armor. Ghost caught sight of the twin-engine attack aircraft as it dropped below the ridgeline, its pilot clearly unconcerned about the SAM threats that had turned her morning reconnaissance into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The distinctive sound of the GAU-8 cannon filled the valley as 30mm depleted uranium rounds chewed through the first missile site in a display of controlled violence that made Ghost's heart soar. "Ghost 11, this is Reaper 27. Callsign is Wicked, and I'm here to spoil someone's day." The voice belonged to a woman, her tone carrying the easy confidence of a pilot who had made a career out of close air support in hostile territory. "I've got eyes on multiple SAM sites and some very unhappy people shooting at you. Let's even the odds." Ghost felt a surge of hope as she watched Wicked's A-10 methodically engage the missile batteries. The Warthog was built for exactly this kind of fight, low, slow, and deadly against ground targets. Its pilot flew with surgical precision, using the mountainous terrain to mask her approaches while delivering devastatingly accurate fire against the hidden weapons positions. Reaper, I count at least 6 more sites in this valley. Someone set up a serious ambush here. Ghost pulled her F-16 into a climbing turn, finally able to gain altitude now that the immediate SAM threats were being suppressed. From her higher vantage point, she could see the full scope of the enemy installation. This isn't Taliban. This is way too sophisticated. Copy that, Ghost. I'm seeing military vehicles and what looks like foreign advisors down there. Definitely not your average mountain fighters. Wicked's A-10 rolled in for another attack run, this time targeting a command vehicle that had been coordinating the missile launches. Question is, how did they know you were coming? That question had been eating at Ghost since the first missile warning. Someone with access to classified flight plans had fed her mission details to an enemy force capable of staging a complex ambush in one of the most remote areas of Afghanistan. The level of coordination required months of preparation and detailed intelligence about American operations in the region. Her radio crackled with an incoming transmission on the command frequency. Ghost 11, this is Kandahar Operations. Return to base immediately. Mission is aborted. The voice belonged to Colonel Henderson, the base commander, but something in his tone sent warning signals through her combat-trained instincts. Sir, we're currently engaged with multiple hostiles. Reaper 27 is providing fire support while we gather intelligence on this facility. Ghost kept her response professional, but she was already calculating flight times and fuel states. Something about the colonel's order felt wrong, too urgent, too final. Negative, Ghost. You will return to base immediately. That is a direct order. Henderson's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, but also something else: anxiety, fear. Disengage all hostile contact and return via waypoint Charlie 7. Ghost felt ice form in her stomach. Waypoint Charlie 7 would take her directly over another valley system that offered perfect ambush terrain for anyone who might be tracking her movements. The colonel was either incompetent or compromised, and neither option offered comfort to a pilot already fighting for survival in enemy territory. Reaper, did you copy that transmission? She asked Wicked over their tactical frequency. Roger that, Ghost, and I don't like it any more than you do. Charlie 7 puts you right through bandit country with no backup and no support. The A-10 pilot's voice carried professional concern mixed with growing suspicion. Someone really wants you flying alone through hostile territory. Ghost made a decision that would either save her life or end her career. Kandahar Operations, this is Ghost 11. I'm declaring an emergency due to hostile action. Will comply with return orders after completing current engagement. She switched frequencies before Henderson could respond. Reaper, I think we need to finish what we started here. Copy that, Ghost. Let's go hunting. The two aircraft swept through the Korangal Valley like avenging angels, methodically destroying the missile sites and gathering photographic evidence of the sophisticated military installation hidden in the mountains. Every target they eliminated revealed new questions about who had built this facility and how they had obtained detailed intelligence about American flight operations. But with each passing minute, Ghost knew she was burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. Someone wanted her dead, and they were willing to use official channels to make it happen. Wicked's A-10 pulled up from her final strafing run, black smoke trailing from multiple destroyed vehicles scattered across the valley floor. The enemy installation that had threatened American forces for months was now a collection of burning wreckage and scattered debris. But Ghost knew their tactical victory was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Ghost, I'm seeing movement on the ridgelines. Looks like someone's trying to escape before the cavalry arrives. Wicked's voice carried professional satisfaction mixed with concern. We've got personnel moving on foot toward what looks like a prepared extraction point. Ghost rolled her F-16 to get a better view of the fleeing figures. Through her targeting pod, She could see a group of 6 individuals moving with military precision toward a flat area suitable for helicopter landing. Their equipment and movement patterns suggested special operations training rather than local militia forces. These weren't Taliban fighters. They were professionals, possibly foreign advisors or mercenaries working with enemy forces. "Reaper, can you get closer for identification?" Ghost asked while simultaneously transmitting the video feed back to Kandahar. Whatever political consequences awaited her return to base, she was determined to gather every piece of intelligence possible about the enemy operation. "Negative, Ghost. I'm seeing multiple heat signatures converging on that location. Looks like our friends called for backup." Wicked's A-10 banked away from the extraction site as enemy small arms fire began reaching toward her aircraft. Time to go before this gets worse. Ghost was about to acknowledge when her radar warning receiver suddenly came alive with a new threat. Not surface-to-air missiles this time, but air-to-air radar from an aircraft approaching from the north. Her blood chilled as the signature resolved into something that shouldn't exist in Afghan airspace: a fighter aircraft with advanced radar capabilities. "Reaper, I've got an unknown air contact bearing 010, Angels 25, showing hostile emissions." Ghost's training took over as she began evasive maneuvers while trying to identify the approaching threat. "This keeps getting better." "Copy that, Ghost. I'm seeing him too. Single contact, fast mover, definitely not one of ours." Wicked's voice had shifted from satisfaction to professional concern. Whoever set this trap brought serious hardware. The approaching aircraft revealed itself as it crested the mountain peaks. A MiG-29 Fulcrum in desert camouflage, its twin tails and distinctive silhouette unmistakable against the morning sky. The fighter belonged to no nation officially operating in Afghan airspace, which meant either a very serious breach of sovereignty or involvement by forces that weren't supposed to exist. Ghost's F-16 was loaded for ground attack, her weapons optimized for destroying surface targets rather than engaging enemy fighters. The MiG-29 pilot would know this, would be counting on her disadvantage to secure an easy kill. But Ghost hadn't survived 18 months of combat operations by accepting easy assumptions about tactical situations. "Reaper, I need you to get clear of this area. That Fulcrum is carrying air-to-air missiles, and he's not here for the scenery." Ghost armed her remaining AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles while running calculations on engagement geometry and escape routes. "I'll try to keep him busy while you egress." "Negative, Ghost. I'm not leaving you alone with that bastard." Wicked's A-10 began a climbing turn that would position her for a defensive engagement. "Besides, someone needs to witness whatever happens here." The MiG-29 pilot opened fire at maximum range, sending an R-77 active radar missile streaking across the valley toward Ghost's position. She immediately began defensive maneuvers, diving toward the mountains while dispensing chaff to confuse the incoming weapons guidance system. The missile lost lock and exploded harmlessly against a granite cliff face, but the message was clear. Someone wanted American pilots dead, and they had brought professional hardware to ensure the job got done. Ghost realized with growing certainty that this entire operation had been designed to eliminate her while making it look like combat losses in hostile territory. The ambush, the official orders routing her through dangerous airspace, even Phantom's suspicious behavior, it all pointed to a conspiracy that reached far beyond Taliban fighters with shoulder-fired missiles. Someone wearing an American uniform wanted her dead, and they were willing to start a small war to make it happen. The MiG-29 pilot was good, but Ghost had advantages beyond superior aircraft performance. She knew these mountains intimately, had spent months learning every ridge line and valley that could provide tactical advantage in exactly this kind of engagement. The enemy pilot was skilled, but he was fighting on her home ground. Ghost pulled her F-16 into a vertical climb that pushed her aircraft to the edge of its performance envelope, bleeding airspeed while gaining precious altitude. The MiG followed, its twin engines providing excellent thrust-to-weight ratio as it matched her maneuver. But at the apex of her climb, Ghost performed a maneuver that existed on the edge of aerodynamic possibility, a falling leaf stall that dropped her F-16 directly behind the climbing. The Sidewinder missile left her aircraft with a distinctive whoosh, its infrared seeker locking onto the MiG's hot engine exhausts. The enemy pilot had perhaps 2 seconds to realize his tactical error before 30 pounds of high explosive ended his contribution to the morning's festivities. The explosion bloomed against the mountain sky like a deadly orange flower, raining debris across the Korengal Valley. Reaper, Splash 1 MiG-29 Valley is clear of hostile aircraft. Ghost's voice carried professional satisfaction, but her mind was already racing ahead to the implications of what had just occurred. Wicked, we need to get this intelligence back to people we can trust. Someone is playing games with American lives. Copy that, Ghost. I've got full gun camera footage of everything that just happened. Multiple SAM sites, sophisticated enemy installation, and a fucking MiG-29 in Afghan airspace. Wicked's A-10 formed up on Ghost's wing as they climbed towards safer altitudes. Question is, who can we trust when we get back? Ghost checked her fuel state and calculated the flight time back to Kandahar. They had enough gas to make it home, but she wasn't sure what kind of reception awaited them. Someone with access to classified mission planning had orchestrated this elaborate ambush, and that someone was still walking around in an American uniform with security clearance and official authority. Her radio crackled with another transmission from Kandahar operations. Ghost 1-1, you are ordered to return to base immediately via waypoint Charlie 7. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary action. Colonel Henderson's voice carried barely controlled anger mixed with something that sounded like desperation. Ghost exchanged a look with Wicked's aircraft, seeing her own suspicions reflected in the A-10's aggressive positioning. Charlie 7 was still a trap, possibly with additional hostile forces positioned to finish what the MiG pilot had started. Someone was very anxious to ensure that Ghost never made it back to tell her story. Kandahar operations, this is Ghost 1-1, declaring emergency due to combat damage and low fuel state, will return via most direct route to ensure aircraft safety. Ghost's lie was technically a court-martial offense, but she was already past worrying about military regulations. Reaper 2-7 will escort due to continued hostile activity in the area. The response came not from Henderson, but from a voice she recognized with growing relief. Ghost 1-1, this is Bulldog. Ignore previous routing instructions and return via waypoint Delta 4. We'll have medical and security teams standing by. Lieutenant Colonel Richardson's gravelly voice carried authority and something else, protection. Someone at Kandahar had figured out that their mission had been compromised. The question was whether they had figured it out in time to prevent whatever final act was planned for Ghost's return to base. As the two aircraft climbed toward the safety of higher altitudes, Ghost caught sight of helicopter activity near the enemy extraction point. Someone was evacuating personnel from the destroyed installation, removing evidence and witnesses before American ground forces could arrive to investigate. The level of coordination suggested resources and planning that went far beyond local insurgent capabilities. This was espionage on an international scale, and Ghost had stumbled into the middle of it by accident. Now she had to survive long enough to expose whoever was selling American intelligence to enemy forces, even if that person wore the same uniform she did. The flight back to Kandahar stretched like a taut wire across hostile territory. Ghost kept her F-16 at maximum altitude while constantly scanning for additional threats, knowing that whoever had orchestrated the morning's ambush might have contingency plans for dealing with surviving witnesses. Beside her, Wicked's A-10 maintained formation with professional precision, the attack aircraft's pilot clearly as suspicious of official channels as Ghost had become. Ghost, I've been thinking about your boy Phantom. Wicked's voice came across the tactical frequency with careful neutrality. Convenient how he disappeared right before the shooting started. Ghost had been avoiding that conclusion, but the evidence was overwhelming. Phantom's behavior at the morning briefing, his insistence on flying as her wingman, his sudden departure when the missiles started flying, it all pointed to inside knowledge of the ambush. Someone had needed a way to get Ghost into the Korangal Valley alone and vulnerable, and her own wingman had provided that service. Copy that, Reaper. I'm starting to think this whole mission was designed to put me in the ground. Ghost's voice carried bitter resignation mixed with growing anger. Question is whether it's personal or if I just saw something I shouldn't have. Could be both. You've been flying reconnaissance missions for months, gathering intelligence on enemy positions and capabilities. Maybe you photographed something that made important people nervous. Wicked's A-10 adjusted position slightly, maintaining tactical spacing while keeping Ghost's aircraft in sight. Or maybe someone needed a convenient scapegoat for intelligence leaks. The second option hit Ghost like flak bursting in clear sky. She'd been wondering how enemy forces had obtained her flight data, but she'd been thinking like a pilot rather than a counterintelligence officer. What if the intelligence leak was deliberate? What if someone had been feeding information to enemy forces for months, and now they needed someone to blame when the operation inevitably came to light? Her record was perfect for the role. A female pilot in a male-dominated field, someone who had faced skepticism and subtle discrimination throughout her career. If she died in combat while under investigation for intelligence leaks, it would be a neat solution for whoever was actually responsible. The real spy would remain safely in place while Ghost took posthumous blame for American deaths. Kandahar approach. This is Ghost 11 with Reaper 27, requesting straighten approach to runway 09. Ghost's radio call was professionally neutral, but she was scanning the airfield below for any signs of unusual activity. 2 aircraft, combat configured, fuel state is adequate for normal approach. The response came from a controller she didn't recognize. Ghost 11, you are cleared for approach, but be advised you have priority traffic. Military police and security teams are positioned at your parking spot. The warning was subtle but clear. She would be taken into custody immediately upon landing. Ghost felt her stomach tighten as she began her descent toward the airfield. Below, she could see the familiar brown and tan buildings of Kandahar Air Base, but now they looked more like prison walls than a safe haven. Someone was moving very quickly to ensure she didn't have time to share her intelligence with anyone outside official channels. Reaper, looks like they're rolling out the red carpet for my arrival, Ghost transmitted to Wicked while configuring her aircraft for landing. I may not have much time to get my story out. Copy that, Ghost. I'll be monitoring guard frequency and recording everything. If something happens to you, at least there will be a record. Wicked's A-10 maintained altitude as Ghost descended toward the runway, positioning herself to witness whatever reception awaited the returning pilot. Ghost's F-16 touched down on the familiar concrete runway with a slight thump, her aircraft's speed bleeding away as she applied wheel brakes and began the rollout toward her assigned parking spot. Through her canopy, she could see vehicles moving toward her position. Not the usual maintenance trucks and fuel Bowsers, but military police Humvees, and what looked like a black sedan with government plates. Whatever debriefing waited for her, it wasn't going to be routine. As her aircraft came to a stop, Ghost began the engine shutdown checklist while simultaneously activating the secure recording system that would preserve all her cockpit conversations and sensor data. If someone was planning to make her disappear, they would at least have to explain why her aircraft's black box told a story that contradicted official reports. The canopy rose with a hydraulic whine, letting desert heat flow into the cockpit along with the sounds of approaching vehicles and urgent radio chatter. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at the side of her aircraft with a maintenance ladder, but his usual smile was replaced by worried concern. "Major, they want you to come with them immediately. No debriefing, no post-flight inspection, just grab your gear and go." His voice carried warning mixed with sympathy. "Whatever's happening, it's bigger than normal operations." Ghost unstrapped from her ejection seat and gathered her survival gear, knowing that each moment of delay increased the risk of evidence disappearing or witnesses being silenced. The morning's combat had proven that someone was willing to kill American service members to protect their secrets, and that someone was still walking around free on her own base. As her boots touched the tarmac, Ghost found herself surrounded by military police officers whose faces revealed nothing about their intentions or loyalties. Behind them stood a tall man in civilian clothes whose expensive suit and government haircut screamed federal agent from 50 yards away. The hunt had followed her home, and now she was about to discover whether the uniform she wore was protection or target. The man in the expensive suit stepped forward as military police formed a loose perimeter around Ghost's aircraft. His credentials identified him as Agent Marcus Webb from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and his cold gray eyes suggested someone accustomed to asking questions that people didn't want to answer. "Major Valdez, I'm Agent Webb. We need to discuss your activities this morning." His voice carried bureaucratic authority backed by federal law enforcement powers. "Your aircraft will be impounded pending investigation, and you'll be accompanying me for debriefing." Ghost felt the familiar weight of injustice settling on her shoulders, but 18 months of combat operations had taught her to keep emotions separate from tactical thinking. Someone was moving very fast to control the narrative, which meant they were either covering up incompetence or protecting something much more serious. "Agent Webb, I need to file my mission report and debrief with my squadron commander first. Standard operating procedure after combat operations." Ghost's voice remained professionally neutral while her mind cataloged.